Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Art in the Wild. On this episode, I spoke with Jamin Hunter Taylor, who is a wildlife photographer based out in Alaska, and the main core of our discussion was environmental portraits and what environmental portraits are to him. Right, so we discussed what an environmental portrait is, how they compare to small in frames, normal portraits, landscapes, all that kind of stuff, how to photograph them, what to look out for, etc., etc. We also discussed his story getting into wildlife photography and just photography in general. Talked about why he likes living in Alaska, and also talked about how I almost got eviscerated by a goshawk like 4 weeks ago. So yeah, it was a pretty good discussion. Jamin's an awesome photographer. I had the chance to briefly meet him in Alaska 2 years ago, but it was a super brief interaction. So I'm hoping to be able to get back up there and meet him again at some point. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the episode, and I will see you over there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Art in the Wild. I'm here with Jamin Hunter Taylor. Jamin, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm blessed. Thank you.
I think it's hard to not do fantastic in Alaska, man. I was just talking, we were talking about like where you are and the weather and stuff like that, and just how incredible that wildlife is. I have one question that relates to one of the episodes I did recently. Do you see northern goshawks out there at all?
Yeah, it's funny because for a couple of years that was my nemesis bird.
Really?
I just I couldn't find one and
Hmm.
had never seen one. Um and then one winter I finally saw one. And that like broke open the seals and then I started seeing them everywhere. So I've actually had some pretty cool encounters with them. And I've seen them as far as like I don't know, a quarter of a mile from my house.
Hmm.
Actually, no, I saw one this spring actually, flying over my house. So I've seen them just in this area
There you go.
quite often. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Two things there, actually. I have found that sometimes you just see an animal and then it just opens the floodgates and you see them all the time. I've had that
Yes.
happen with a bunch of animals. I had it happen with moose. I tried years and years and years. I couldn't find them. This isn't an animal, but I did have it happen with Cybertrucks. I know that sounds completely unrelated. I don't know if you've seen them up there, but I remember when in 11th grade when the Cybertruck came out, I was like, oh, it's gonna be crazy to see one of those on the road. And then everyone's been telling me how they've seen them, and I went months without seeing one, and I just saw one like 3 days ago, and I've seen three in the last 3 days. Kind of unrelated, but the reason why I brought up
Yeah, that's
goshawk,
funny. I saw my first one just like last week, I think, up here.
yeah,
So
yeah, it's weird. It was literally, I was kept saying, I'm like, I haven't seen one. Everyone's like, I've seen 25. And I'm like, dude, where are you seeing these things? And then I saw one, and I saw one the next day, and then one like yesterday. And now I'm probably going to see them all the time. But the reason why I brought up goshawks specifically, because one of my friends told me about a goshawk nest in Vermont recently, which is like they're hard to get here. They're here, but
yeah.
they're difficult, and you have to go up north, and they're elusive and stuff. And I went to check out this nest, and I think goshawk's reputation around their nests. Dude, I got like
Yes.
mauled. It was bad.
Oh,
I never even got to see the nest. I never even got close to the nest. It just started dive bombing me. I like dove out of the way on a gravelly trail and like messed up my arm, and then it whacked me in the back of the head. So that
ooh,
that was my one experience with goshawk. So now they are my nemesis bird for a slightly different reason. But
yeah.
yeah, I was wondering. I don't know if you've had any experience with
Oh,
goshawk nests before.
yeah, I have had last let's say last spring, I found a nest that had actually the babies that are already fledged,
Mhm.
but yeah, I got swooped on a couple of times
Yeah.
and nothing ever hit me, but I was definitely like, you've got to wear helmet and protective gear if you're gonna attempt that. But I generally try to. I, I don't really go after nests at all with my photography. I just kind of usually avoid that. It's seems to be kind of a bigger contentious thing among the community,
Mhm.
and I don't know. I don't really have any interest in photographing nest sites, so I just kind of leave it alone and don't
Yeah, for
really
sure.
go after anything.
especially with like a more aggressive species like goshawks, like you are causing
Yeah,
a lot
for
of
sure.
disturbance. My plan was literally, I was like, I'm just gonna go in there for 5 minutes, snap some shots, then bounce. That was my whole idea. But they were like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. You're not gonna do any of
Nope.
that. So yeah, I was like, if I ever do go back, I'm bringing like a full face. I was thinking like a bomb suit, the big green ones
Oh
that they
yeah.
use to diffuse C4 and stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna have to bring that to even feel mildly confident. But if I ever have someone I don't like, I'll just suggest they go down that hiking trail. Be like, it's great. There's a waterfall down there. And everything.
Yeah, it's a nice casual walk.
Exactly. Yeah. No, but Alaska is really a great place. Have you lived out there your whole life? Or have you like did you move
Um,
up there?
yeah, I was born and raised out here in Alaska. I was raised actually like 2 hours north or so.
Mhm.
And I lived in when I graduated high school, I moved to Tennessee and I lived in Nashville for 6 years.
Oh, really?
And I really liked that. And then I came back up. I intentionally came back up for a summer and was only going to stay for another summer and then go back to Nashville, which I had kind of like made home.
Mhm.
But I didn't end up moving back to Nashville. I stayed up here for some different reasons. And then I think once I really got into photography, that changed things a lot for me. And I started seeing Alaska for the beauty that it was, you
Mhm.
know? And now I love it up here. Now it's just like, man, this is the place. I
It
mean,
is the
winters get a little long and can get dark and it can be tough up here. But if my wife and I took our kids, it wasn't last winter, but the winter before, and we went down to Florida for a month, and that was so nice. Because
wow.
Florida is like, it's crazy down there. There's so many birds. It's like cheating. And so it was amazing. A month being down there was so good. And we got back to Alaska and were able to, finish out the winter, which was nice. But last year we didn't have that and we really missed it. So we're going to try to make that effort and do that again here this coming winter. So
Nice. What part of Florida?
we were in this little place called Eustis, which is about an hour northwest of Orlando. So just kind of in the heart of Florida there.
Nice. Yeah. I went to Florida when I was a kid, like really young. Couldn't remember anything. Really wasn't interested. I was interested in animals, but not birds that much. But I just went
Mm,
down for a conference in Sarasota I was speaking at, and dude, it is cheating. And then I just went to St. Augustine. I
yeah.
don't know if you've been to the alligator farm in St. Augustine.
No.
Dude, it's this place where it's like it's technically a zoo for like crocodilians, and they have this big gator pond. But since there's so many gators, the
Wow.
birds will nest in the trees because no predators can get in. So there's tricolored
Yeah.
heron nests 6 inches off the boardwalk, and they just sit there and stare at you. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
ridiculous. I mean, yeah, so Florida,
Yeah.
very different than Alaska, for sure. But
Very
were you
different.
interested in animals when you went down to Tennessee? Like, were you interested in animals your whole life, or is this a new thing that came along with photography?
Um, I was kind of mildly interested and like my dad was a outdoorsman, hunter, trapper. He liked fishing. So actually that's kind of where my middle name comes from is
Oh, really?
my dad wanted to name me Jamin Hunter Fisher Trapper Taylor. And my mom said, no, pick one. And, you can leave it at that. So I got Hunter. And my dad was, I'm the only son that my dad has, and I've got five sisters. So uh, he kind of I think wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but that really wasn't something I was interested in. I grew up being an artist and always drawing or painting or
Really?
sculpting or some sort of thing like that. So that was having that artistic eye. Kind of just I've had that as long as I can remember. And so I think when I found photography, it when I discovered that photography was a form of art, that was it. That was like, this is how I'm going to express myself. And so Alaska really captivates my creative vision, because it's just like it's got it all. It's got the mountains and the forests and the animals and so much beauty out here. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
How did that process of finding photography like actually happen? Because I know a lot of people they like take a high school class and they're like, oh, this is kind of cool. Some people like my mom was a photographer. I've always been interested in animals since I was like the size of a loaf of bread. So I was like, maybe I can take photos with her camera of animals, and then it kind of spiraled out of control. But how did you actually get into photography itself, and then specifically wildlife photography from there?
Yeah. Well, actually in college I had some photography classes, and of course I wasn't too interested in photography at that time, but it kind of gave me a little bit of, I guess, history with it, but at the time it wasn't digital yet. And so, developing film and that sort of thing was kind of interesting. And then actually it was 2015, and I was walking around a campground that's not far from my house, and my son was like 1 year old, and me and my wife and my son were walking around this campground. It was like 10 o'clock at night,
Mm,
and it was in the middle of June, and I'm hearing this bird like sing in the forest, and it was the most beautiful sound. I just remember like, wow, I can't believe a bird is singing like this and making this sound.
mm,
And so it enchanted me, and totally captivated me. And I was like, I need to know what bird this is, because that sound is crazy beautiful.
mhm,
It was amazing. And so I think it took me like a week to find out what it was, like going through all these birds and what songbirds would have been in the area. Like I had to whittle down like what it could have been. And then when I was listening to songs, I was like, oh, that's it. And so it ended up being a Swainson's thrush,
mhm.
and which has one of the most beautiful sounds in the forest. And so that got me interested in birds. So I started thinking about um, all the birds my dad used to talk about, warblers and thrush and everything. And I started to like, man, I wonder how many different bird species are in Alaska, And so um, I started getting interested in birds. And then being an artist, I wanted to have some reference photos to start drawing them and painting them. And I joined this Facebook community called Birds of Alaska, and I started seeing some really beautiful photos that people had taken, um, and so I was like, all right, I'm gonna get a camera. I'm gonna start taking some of these photos and then use them for a reference and draw them. And so I got this really cheap Sony, point and shoot bridge camera, and it led me down a path of frustration very quickly
Yeah.
because it just wasn't doing it, like it wasn't getting me what I was wanting. And so I got rid of that one, and I got my first Nikon with the interchangeable lenses,
Mhm,
and that was it. So I started, taking photos of birds and getting. I mean, I look back at my old photos and they're so terrible, but it got me started, and I just pushed ahead and I shot as much as I could, and I shot all the time. And eventually, you just kind of start developing uh, your eye for it, and you pick out the ones that are terrible, and you learn to get better and better, and try new things. And at that time, I was reading a lot of content too. I was looking at like I was looking at stuff on compositions, and listening to podcasts on like, what makes a captivating photo. And one of the things that I remember hearing about was like, learn to see through your photo, meaning like be aware of your backgrounds, so that you can like compose your photo. And so that was really impactful. And so I learned all these things over time, but it was just that continually getting out there and shooting all the time. But it really was like when I realized that photography could be a form of art for me, then like I stopped wanting to paint and draw them so much, and just
yeah.
kind of focused on photography being that creative outlet itself. And I think when that happened is when I really started delving into it, and seeing what I could do, and trying different things and trying new things. And um, yeah, that was the catalyst that kind of like got me through to like being creative with the camera.
That's awesome. How many years ago did you say this was? I don't remember
That
if
was Yeah, I got serious. I think like 2016 is when I got my Nikon.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was about then that I started doing that.
Yeah, Nikon's the correct
So
brand to pick too, for sure.
yeah. So I guess it's been 9 years already. Or is that right? Well, no, 8 years or so.
Mhm.
So
That's awesome. Yeah,
yeah, that's
I've
pretty
got a
wild.
friend who's like adamantly Canon and I'm adamantly Nikon. So like we'll go out and we'll shoot
Yeah.
together and we'll give each other, we'll laugh when like the new model comes out and all that fun stuff. But you know how he also has a red camera, the cinema camera, and Nikon recently
Oh wow.
acquired red. So whenever he pulls
Yep.
up with his red, I'm like, "Hey, how's the Nikon doing?" And he doesn't appreciate that. Very much. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, did you have any specific photographers when you were like reading content primarily and listening to podcasts that kind of drove your style, or was it purely like you just listened to tips and then evolved it yourself?
Yeah, I did have people that I was very influenced by. My good friend Ray Hennessy was a huge influence to me, and so um, it was kind of interesting because I would follow him, and I was really interested in like because he creates art. Ray's very much has an artistic eye, and he's not just taking portraits of birds. He does that, but he also like really works on creating art, and really intentional with his photography. So I was following him, and then we became friends online, and then he ended up wanting to come, had some time available, and he was like, "Hey, I was thinking about coming to Alaska," and so he came up, and we started instant friendship between
Mhm.
us, and so yeah, his work was really influential, as well as Kuram Khan, Josh Galicki. Some of those guys were really influential in what I was looking for and kind of what like I saw as art, beyond
Yeah.
photography. And I think that really influenced uh, where I kind of drifted off to in terms of my own work.
Mhm, for sure. Ray has been mentioned, I think, more times than anybody on this podcast. And then outside of the podcast, dude, he's like, yeah, I mean, he kind of drove this whole new genre of wildlife photography that you find, I think, primarily on social media and stuff. And then now it's starting to leak out into like contests and things like that as people in social media are entering those. But I feel like he was a
Yeah.
huge driving force between more of a creative approach to wildlife photography. Not that it was just him, but I feel like a lot of his small and frame stuff and then his wide angle warbler stuff and all these very unique
Yep.
styles that nobody was doing. And then you look at like all these fantastic photographers across the platform, like there's tons of great people, but you really do see a lot of Ray in all of these photographers, and he's kind of influenced a lot of people with that. So it's really cool. It sounds like also you were like a huge step in your improvement as well, which is awesome. Like for me, I've talked about this a bunch on the podcast, but I had to literally be like explicitly told how to take a good photo. Like people had to spell it out for me because I was going for 5 years taking like not great shots, to put it lightly. And you were correct about looking back on your old photos, and now you're like,
Yeah.
ooh, man, that's an image. Like that is a conglomeration of pixels for sure. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, for me, it was a lot of actually being in like group chats and learning from people and then kind of going out to those podcasts were a big thing for me, and then listening to actually like
Mhm.
actual in-field techniques and stuff like that. So you mentioned you were shooting with Nikon. What gear do you have now currently? Like what setups do you bring into the field?
Let's see. So I'm still shooting Nikon. Of course, I switched to mirrorless. Couple of let's see, 2 years ago now, I think, is when I switched over, and I think I still let's see, I still have two f mount lenses. Like I have a 500, which I barely shoot anymore,
Yeah.
and mostly I would say primarily I shoot my Z9 with the 180 to 600 lens.
Mhm.
I really like that, and then I recently acquired a 24 to 120 f4, which I really like, and that one's been fun to shoot with, and then I use a 70 to 200 as well. So yeah, those are like my trio of lenses that I go to, and they all have different use cases, and or they're all fun to shoot with. So,
How do you like
but I
the
also have
180?
a Z6, and then I've actually been kind of thinking about selling that off and getting the new Z6 III, but I'm not sure yet. So we'll see.
Yeah. How do you like your 180 to 600? I know you said you liked it, but like more specifically in terms, I'm thinking like sharpness. This is kind of a selfish question because I'm actually looking at getting it. So
Hmm.
I do kind of want to learn some thoughts from other photographers, but I've heard good things. What are you thinking about it?
Yeah, so I've had this discussion. I was actually talking about this a couple weeks ago with Ray and Brad James, but so I'm coming from shooting primarily with a 500 f4e, which is almost like perfect optics. It's such a great lens, but it's heavy and you're stuck at 500 millimeters, right?
Yeah.
So there's limitations to that sharpness and that quality. So in saying that, the 180 to 600 is a step back in quality. You're not going to get, unless you're like super close to something, you're not going to get the super sharp images that the 500 produces. Um, However, what you get in return is more versatility with a zoom. You know, you can zoom out of a scene if you need to, and I mean the 180 to 600 is a pretty nice optic range.
Mhm.
And so what I have found is that I am less concerned with pixel peeping and getting every detail and counting every feather or fur, and
Yeah.
more interested in the overall feel of something. And if it's reasonably sharp and you can tell what it is, then I'm pretty happy with it.
Mhm.
And I really just think that, it's providing that kind of nice range to get those, nice shots. And you can zoom in if you want and you can zoom out. So just having that option to zoom out is so good because, animals move around, birds move around, and they sometimes come closer to you. And you're like, wait a minute, you were perfect right where you were. Don't come closer because now,
Yeah.
your feet are out of the frame. And so being able to zoom out is just so nice. And so, I traded off quality for versatility, and I don't really regret that. So it's a really great lens. It's light and it's easy to use, and I love the short throw that goes from 180 to 600. I think I would say the only real downside to it is that when you're manually focusing, it takes a long time to kind of rack the focus back.
Mhm.
Um, that is kind of a longer throw, when you're just kind of zooming, trying to get something in focus, and you've really got to crank on it. So um, I think I would say that's the only thing I don't love about it, but the times I need to actually manually focus and bring something back are pretty slim. So I don't mind that
Yeah,
all
for
that
sure.
much.
I'm in a very similar situation because I have the 500 PF right now, which I actually got when I
Okay.
upgraded, I think like a year and a half ago. I went from the D500 and the Sigma 150 to 600 to the Z9 and the 500 PF. And I was like, oh, I'm always shooting like 90% of the time I'm shooting on 600 with my Sigma, right? So I should just go for a 500 prime. But the thing is, and you were kind of like speaking to me back there when you were talking about caring more about the atmosphere of the file as opposed to the specific like, oh my gosh, is its like left eye perfectly in focus? Like, is that one hair on its nose
Yeah.
perfectly in focus? Because like
Right.
I feel I care more about the environment. I've posted some shots on Instagram whose quality was like you could say they're sharp if you like didn't have glasses on or something when you zoom in, right? But for me,
Sure.
I cared more about the atmosphere, but I did also cared about the focal length and the black background blur. So I was like, oh, I'll just get this prime for the quality. That 90, like I said, 90% of the time I'm on 600. That 10% of the time turns out to be really important. And
Mhm.
now I'm stuck at 500 and I'm like, I really want that versatility back, right? And I'm looking at
Yeah.
getting the 180 to 600. I'm sad about potentially losing that quality, right? Because I went from a Sigma, which is like everything you take a
Oh
photo
yeah. Right.
of. Half the time it looks like Minecraft when you blow it up. Like it's just not sharp. And then, you know,
That's so
it,
funny.
it's weird because like half the time I had a very inconsistent Sigma. Half the time it was tack sharp. Like I had a really good Sigma compared to other people, but like a quarter of the time
Yeah.
it just wasn't sharp. And then I told everyone like, yeah, go get it. Like it's a good lens. And then they all got it. I had one friend who got three and none of them were sharp. And I like calibrated them and everything.
That's
But
crazy.
it was insane. Yeah. So super inconsistent lens, but I went from that to a Z9 with a 500 PF, and it's everything is crystal clear, tack sharp. And now I'm
Yeah.
worried about regressing from that, but I also still don't care that much about sharpness, and the limited range is killing me on the 500. So I am thinking about going back to that 180 to 600. So that's why I was just curious about what your thoughts are because I know you're really
Yeah.
experienced and good photographer. One more thing about it. How do you feel about the focusing speed in autofocus? Is it fast? I mean,
Oh,
it's
it's
probably not
yeah. It's actually better than my 500 f4e.
really.
Uh, Adapted, yeah, because I have to use the FTZ2 adapter.
Mhm.
And I remember this past March, I was in Homer with the workshop with my buddy Sergis, and we were shooting long-tailed ducks off the pier in the ocean, and it was sunrise, like it was pink, beautiful sky. And um, I remember being so frustrated because I decided to throw on the 500 f4, and it was so clunky and heavy and awkward because I'm shooting on the rocks, but I'm trying to like move around and trying to maneuver this thing, and it's so crazy and heavy and all that. And I remember just being so frustrated because it would lose focus often.
Yeah.
And so then I switched to my 180 to 600, and it was like the focus was so much better. It wasn't even funny. So I think it's just like the native Z glass is just works better with it. And any kind of honestly, any kind of like lag and quality I've found that I can make up for with like topaz denoise. It'll clean it up just a little bit. And I don't like a lot of topaz because it can start looking fake, you know. I'm sure you know what it looks like when you overcook something, and it kind of ends up like too crispy and crinkly, and you're like, that doesn't look quite real.
For sure. Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's limitations to um, how much you can crank the denoise, but I think just a little bit actually like gets you in that zone where it looks pretty darn good.
Mhm.
So I've been using that, and not all the time, not on every photo, but sometimes they need just a little bit more help. And I found that denoise works really well there to just kind of bring it up and get it on that level.
That is really interesting. I was thinking because I have the FTD adapter as well, and it's still really snappy on the 500 PF. I was thinking for some
Yeah.
reason it would be slower on the 180 to 600 because I'm still Sigma brained a little bit. And that thing, like if you
Yep.
missed a warbler, it would maybe take like 2 to 4 hours to rehunt and find it again. It was kind of a disaster. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, now that I know that the focus speed is actually comparable or even better than a 500 f4, even though it is F to Z, like that actually is
Yep.
that might have convinced me there. I might have to go go get
Yeah.
that
I
lens.
I didn't look back, honestly. I've been shooting with this lens since September of last year. And I can honestly say that like I don't even hardly I've counted on one hand the amount of times I've picked up my 500 f4 and shot with that.
Mhm.
Um, I just have more fun. It's more fun with the 180 600. It's light, it's portable, it's not, 8 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it's just way more fun. And I'm coming from like before that I had the 200 500, and I loved that lens. I really loved that lens, and it was such a good lens. I know some people had some I know there's a few bad copies out there that weren't sharp, but mine, the one I got was tack sharp.
Mhm.
And it was just such a great camera, or excuse me, a great lens. And I love the versatility of that lens. So going from that to the 500 f4 to a prime lens, I remember the limitation of just being stuck at 500. And, there were times when I was too close to something. And what I ended up having to do with that was like, oftentimes I would like take multiple photos of something and stitch them together in Lightroom just
Oh,
so I
really?
could have like the whole portrait of something, and, but you don't want to have to do that, you don't want to have to resort to stitching something together in Lightroom. So, I'm thrilled with the 180 600. I mean, it's just, and one other thing that I like about it that's worth mentioning is that with a big prime lens, you often get like a really soft, creamy background. And I I used to like that pretty exclusively, but I've found that I kind of like having a little bit more texture now,
Mhm.
especially if you're doing like more small in frame, or kind of including more landscape, or that sort of thing. I like having that texture in there, and it just kind of creates a little bit more visual interest. And so I really don't mind the uh, little bit more of a thicker uh, field of view. That focal field.
Mhm.
So the thicker, what is it? Focal plane. What am I trying to say?
I know
uh,
exactly what you're trying to say. I think it might be focus.
yeah,
Um,
focal plane. Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm
we'll
just too
call it
tired to
that.
know
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah. So uh I really like that. So I've gotten some really cool textures with that lens, and I'm really enjoying that. So yeah, I would say I don't think that you would regret getting it. I think you would have a lot of fun with it. And especially considering, it's like it's 6.3 on the long end, so you're losing what, like a third of a stop or something like that. But uh the ISO capabilities of the newer cameras like the Z9 is so nice that a little cleanup work, like I said, and it's a really nice file. So yeah, I think you'd like it.
Sweet. That was a really glowing review. And also I do have to agree. I had the like I really like those clean, buttery portraits. And I still do. Like if I get one of an animal I think it's really cool, like yeah, I'm really happy. But I also do really like a lot of texture in an image, particularly ones that have a lot of like blown out of focus things and bokeh in the background and then texture running through the
Yeah.
bokeh. I love that. I love that kind of stuff. And speaking about these lenses and also what you mentioned earlier about including more landscaping or images, I kind of want to move on to the main topic that we're going to talk about today, which is these environmental portraits, right? Which is kind of like
Yep.
in my head, it's like a mix between a small and frame, which is the new thing. I think Ray kind of coined that. That was his whole thing. And then your main portraits that people used to be the main thing of wildlife photography, like the headshot. Everyone wants the headshot of the bird that has been taken a million times, right? And the environmental portrait is kind of in between those two things. So can you describe what an environmental portrait is to you, like what you consider to be an environmental portrait?
Yeah. Yeah. And up here in Alaska, I think environmental portraits, they 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 work and they captivate me for one of the main reasons is the mountains that we have up here. I mean, pretty much like anywhere you go, there's like these towering, gigantic mountains. Especially where I live, it's just we're surrounded by them pretty much. And I really like trying to get those mountains in the photo because it kind of gives you a sense of place, you know. And I still love a nice clean portrait of an animal because for multiple reasons, but the main reason I think is because you kind of get that like personality shot of that particular animal. You get to see like into its soul through its eyes and the various characteristics of its face, and like just this clean, beautiful portrait of this whatever animal it is. There's still a place for that. I like that still. And then small and frame to me is more like uh without any distractions. You've got like let's say you've got like a open water and you've got like a loon on it, right? And then you've got it really small in frame. Let's say you've got a little bit of fog coming off the lake, but for the most part, your eye is drawn to this loon that's kind of, small in the frame. It's just this little, it's not a close up, but the rest of the background is basically kind of white space that all draws your eye to the loon, right?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what I think of when I think small and frame. And so um, these environmental portraits are kind of the idea of small and frame, but the idea and the thought behind it is to try to include that animal's habitat around it. So you're including things like trees and mountains and whatever else might work. And there's certainly a challenge to that, because as you zoom out, or if you decide to put on a, say a 24 to 70 or 24 to 120 or something versus your 600 or 500 millimeter lens, it forces you to think differently, and it forces you into a totally different workspace where you're like, all right, now I've got to compose this totally differently. I've got to see this in a different way. And it makes you kind of think about, okay, are there mountains here? Is there something else here that I need to be like zoomed out for, because that's an important piece of that animal's story, right? Of where it lives. And I think that's important, especially in a place where there are those kind of iconic scenic stuff around. If you're on a plains, um, I think there can be a story there too, like you're not going to necessarily have like mountains or something like that, but like having like grassy fields or something kind of layered or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Trying to include some of that stuff because having a sense of place, I think, is important for wildlife because um, taking them out of their element, I guess, although those are beautiful portraits, but I think there's something magical about like having it in a captivating environment that shows off the beauty of where it lives. And puts it in its place in its story, and like there's just something captivating and magical about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing that also to take into account too is it's just kind of like supply and demand. Like a basic portrait is a lot easier to get than a visually compelling environmental portrait. It's
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
like as you said, it takes a lot of work. And now the barrier to entry is so low, like anyone can go pick up a used Sigma for $400 and a used D500 for like another $400 and then have a setup that was better than any setup that existed 15 years ago and then go out and get those portraits. But being able to actually have a visual eye and be like, okay, this mountain looks good with this tree in the composition. If I put the moose right here, yada 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 da 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 da, I'm going to make an image that looks nice. And that's a lot more difficult to do than say like, oh, I'm just going to get close and blow the background out on on F4. You know what I'm saying? So I think
Exactly. Yep.
that's a big thing too, especially with Instagram. Like you're sitting there scrolling all day and you're just seeing banger after banger after banger of all these awesome shots. Like no matter how good of a portrait you just got of a wolf or a coyote or a pine marten, all you have to do is scroll through 30 minutes on Instagram, and then all of a sudden, like someone's like, "Oh, look, I went to Churchill and I got this wolf like fighting with a polar bear, and there's flames in the background or something." And it's like, you know, it's yeah. So I think actually taking time to make a visually compelling environmental portrait is going to set you apart as a photographer and make your work a lot more compelling. And there's also the element too of actually showing non wildlife photographers where these animals are living, which can help for conservational
Yeah.
efforts or just appreciating where they live, right? Like out here in the White Mountains, if you get a shot of like a moose in a lake with a really famous mountain from the area, like Mount Katahdin or Mount Washington or something like that, that's gonna make people appreciate it more than like, oh look, here's another moose headshot. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I think for sure, like that's a really important element of the whole thing. And one thing too, I don't know if you've experienced this, but for me, like after I was getting portrait after portrait, aside from the animals, I don't get to see that much at all, like bears or moose or things
Right.
like that. The portraits kind of get boring, man. Like you get it and you're looking at it,
Yeah.
and it doesn't bring the same level of fulfillment that they would have a year or 2 years ago. I don't know if you had the same thing happen to you or not.
Yes. Yeah. I I I have actually. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, which is interesting that you bring it up because there's something about like being there in the moment, right? There's that magic of like there's a bear in front of me and I am photographing this bear, right?
Yeah.
Like it's your heart's beating. It's like, wow, this is happening. This is amazing. Like what an experience. And so you're getting the photos, but then like you take them home and you're like, why didn't I zoom out for that? Or why didn't I, because like you said, like anybody can go to the store and get this set up and bang out portraits and with the smooth backgrounds and everything, but it really does take a concerted effort and thought, and a lot of times preparation and research um and waiting for the right time, whether that's sunrise or sunset to get like more color in the sky or whatever it may be. But there's a whole lot more, I feel like, work that goes into these environmental portraits than just getting these clean background close-ups, of your subject. And it really does take a different mental headspace to get there and really think about the scene a lot more and prepare for that. And yeah, it's really fun, and I think that's part of the challenge of it. And I really enjoy that challenge of kind of getting those types of shots. And I really kind of feel like I haven't been doing that lately. I haven't got any environmental portraits that I'm really super thrilled about in a
Mhm.
while.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like I'm kind of bored with getting the same shots. Or like you said, like if it's a new species or a species that I haven't got to shoot very often, then that's exciting because I mean, why wouldn't it be? You get, oh, I've never gotten a shot of a killdeer or whatever it may be, and so like we don't get killdeer very often, so I posted one recently
No,
just
it's
because
funny
it
when
was
you
like
said
this
that
is this
because my
bird, like
my work has them like in the lawn. They nested like in the lawn. So when you
oh
said
nice.
killdeer, you have like lynx and wolves and stuff up there in my head. I'm like, that's the one he's gonna pick out of all of those. But I
Yeah,
mean,
it's so
yeah,
funny. Like it's hilarious like what's interesting to us versus you. Like I went down to Florida and like mockingbirds were interesting to me, and I'm photographing mockingbirds, like my first couple days. I'm so excited for shooting mockingbirds, and like that's such a trash bird, or not a trash bird, but you know what I mean? Like it's something like most people would be like, dude, yeah, we see them like daily and they're like, whatever, or grackles or something like that. Um, so I think like yeah, it's just funny, like the rare things. You're like, "Ooh, I got to get a photo of that rare thing," and it makes it fun to kind of do that and fill your portfolio with things that you don't have yet.
Yeah, for sure. When I was in Florida, it's funny. I went to Sarasota and I was at that conference, and I came back the next day for the conference, and there's all these photographers. I'm like, dude, I saw like 50 white ibis. This is crazy. And they're all looking at me and they're like, do you want like a cookie or a trophy or something? Like we see
Yeah.
those in
Yep.
my
Yep. Yep.
yard. Like I don't care, you know? And it is funny because it differs so much from place to place. And like I'm trying to think of a specific example. I mean, if you come out here, like for me, snowy owls are kind of like cool, you know? Like I like them, but they're not too big of
Yeah.
a deal because this is kind of like one of the best spots in the country to get them. But I talk to people from other parts of the country and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I would like crawl over a mile of broken glass to photograph a snowy owl." And I'm like, I mean, it is really interesting, but I would just want to let you know, up in Alaska, dude, like everybody is jealous of all the wildlife that you guys have, man. You got northern hawk owl, great gray, grizzly, moose, lynx, wolves. I mean, dude, it's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, we get a lot of species of owl. And even barred are coming up. I know barred are, I mean, they're a pretty common bird, but they're on their way, like Juneau and some of the like southeast Alaska islands and stuff are getting some more and more barred. But up here, like sawets are common, great horned. Of course, great horned are like common everywhere.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
we get boreal owls and short-eared owls come through, and great grays come through, and yeah, we get a lot of great birds that come through. I think here in South Central, we've only had snowies come through a couple of times.
Mhm.
Um, I got them when I went north, like in 2019. I went up to Uktiagvik, which,
Oh
which
wow.
is the furthest place of north you can get to in the United States, which is kind of cool.
Mhm.
I had a fun time chasing them there, but that was a while ago. So I need some more snowies.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever, dude, Massachusetts area, if you ever come out in the winter, like I've got you. Like there's some really good areas for
Nice.
them out here. We had a northern hawk owl pop up in Maine, which was really crazy, and that
Oh
really is
wow.
pretty rare. And it landed. I was
Yeah.
by myself with my friend. There was no other photographers there, and it kind of blew up and became a celebrity bird after this. But the thing flew at me and then fluttered down because it saw something in some grass in the ditch. So it flew over my head and then hovered over me like a kestrel, not looking at me, but looking in the snowbank, and then hovered down onto a fence post and just sat there like 20 feet from me. I was losing my mind because this is my first real
Wow.
photo encounter with a northern hawk owl. And it was just sitting there on a post. It was kind of looking at me and it was looking into the ground, trying to find, doing their little head wobble and everything like that.
Yeah.
Um, and that was
That's fun.
exceptional. But yeah, your guys' owls are really cool. Now you mentioned earlier small in frames, right? And how you consider a small in frame to be more of an image, like with really like a focus on the subject. How do you feel for your own personal photography, but like also in general? How do you feel environmental portraits kind of compare to small in frames?
Um, I think visually there's more to look at with the
Mhm.
environmental portrait. Like I said before, it gives you more of a sense of place, usually, environment, and all of that. Um, I think small and frame can be really tough, um, but also fun. You can play around with a lot of things with small and frame, whether that's flipping your camera vertical or using things to shoot through, like finding some foreground things or whatever. And not to say that you can do that with environmental portraits, because you certainly can. Um, but it's like they're just two different ways of looking at a scene.
Mhm.
One's trying to like minimize, I think, any other elements besides your subject, and one is trying to include as much of that in a creative way as you can.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the main difference is minimizing versus including including those elements that are around it. So, but I have this like mental checklist that I go through when
Yeah.
I'm with a subject, and it's like, because one of the things I learned from Ray, and this has stuck with me, but I think it was like the first time he was here or something, and we were shooting a northern hawk owl actually
Cool.
in Denali National Park, and I remember like this owl was just kind of hanging out, like hawk owls and saw-whet owls, they just don't really care. They're the I think they're the two owls that are the most accommodating, because they're just like, oh hey, whatever, they
Yeah.
don't fly away. So this hawk owl is just kind of hanging out, and Ray's getting these photos, and I hear him say, all right, what else can I do here?
Mhm.
And so that really stuck with me, and so that's kind of, I start thinking like, what else can I do here? And then I have this mental checklist of like, all right, flip my camera, portrait orientation, are there things to shoot through here that do I need to take a step to the right or to the left? Um, is there water or other birds that I can slow my shutter down for and get something
Mhm.
interesting there? Do I need to stop down? Or like, I just have like this huge checklist of things that I don't always access them in every situation, but I try to remember to like, what else can I do? And that usually triggers like all these things. So, um, yeah, it's fun to play with for sure when you're out there, and you get a subject that sticks around for more than a few seconds before it's gone, because oftentimes like that's all you get
Mhm.
is a couple of seconds, and then it's gone, and so you're lucky like you got a shot in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, like a lot of the times it is just like they're there and they're gone, particularly with songbirds, like your warblers. Man, when I was shooting my old setup, like I would grind the whole warbler season for like a week straight and I'd get like 5 usable shots tops. Like that was it.
Wow.
Now that I have like a little bit faster focus, it's a little bit better and I'm actually able to have a higher keeper rate, but it can be really difficult. I think like when they're staying still, for me, one of the big things is utilization of foreground in particular, because
Mm.
they're like a foreground can completely change your image. Like when I'm speaking at a conference or something like that, I talk about this a lot in pretty much every single talk that I give. I'll be like, if you have something that's standing still, like move around, put it between tree trunks, like put a flower
Absolutely.
bush in front of it, because you might just come up with something that's crazy. I
Yep.
mean, one thing that's really fun, a couple things. Like there's this one shorebird spot that I have, right? And I've been shooting there for 4 years now. And every year I kind of have a different theme for what I'm doing. And last year I was just doing like blue hour with artificial bokeh, right? So like car lights and city lights. And then I was trying to get texture in the bokeh and then try to get really close to the birds of the bokeh as big as possible, or back up so the bokeh is like all stars in the background. And the year before that, it was
Mm.
backlit, right? I was really focused on backlit. For some reason, with my current setup, I find the flares pretty bad. I think it's a lens. So I actually have not been shooting that much backlit, which is kind of a pain. So and that's another reason why I'm looking at getting that 180 to 600 to help out with that. But another thing that's also interesting with small and frames and your environmental portraits is, how do I say this? The distinction between a landscape shot and a wildlife shot, if you get what I'm
Mm.
saying, right?
Yeah.
Because you have some people like Tobias Yoder, for example. A lot of his images are like he's almost like a hybrid landscape wildlife photographer. He's like a landscape photographer that includes wildlife in his work. And I find that some people have different cutoff points, right? Some people are like, hey, it can be like a bear pretty big in the frame with mountains, and it'll be like, oh, this is a landscape shot, or it'll be like a seagull with a waterfall in the background. They'll be like, oh, that's a wildlife shot because that seagull's taking up like 2 pixels, so it still counts, right? So
Yeah.
where do you find yourself falling on this kind of spectrum, right? At what point would you consider it a landscape shot versus like an environmental portrait or a small in frame?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough question. I've got a buddy that's coined the term wildlife scape,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think for that type of thing, I think I would qualify landscape as not having an animal in it, and or at
Mhm.
least not a visible animal, because let's face it, there's probably something in there.
Yeah.
And then a wildlife scape would be something kind of close to an environmental portrait, but I would say it features more of the landscape and more of the landscape in focus. Where environmental portraits, to me, I would say there's still a focus on the animal and the environment, kind of, although there isn't as uh prominent, so it's like you get a feel for the environment without it being like everything's in focus, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So like I've seen plenty of cool photos, and this might be small in frame too, like there's I think the lines get blurry in different situations, right?
Mhm.
Like think about like a bull moose in Denali National Park when all the foliage is turning like orange and red, you know.
Yeah.
And so getting a small in frame there is cool because you can get that moose just small um in all of that like autumn color, right? And then there's spruce trees there that are, I mean, it's just beautiful, and I've gotten some small and frame stuff that I don't know where, it could like, to different people it could fall into different categories, you know. So that's a tough one, I guess, because once again I think the lines blur a little bit sometimes. So um you can call something small and frame, but it might also qualify for like, environmental portrait, depending on, I think, your composition or what you're choosing to include in it, or even your perspective. If you're shooting more like eye level with something, I think you might tend to get a little bit more environment than if you're shooting from a higher position,
Mhm.
you know? So I think that can take an effect too. So yeah, that's a tough one to nail down. I don't know if there's like a solid, you know, definition for all of those.
Yeah, it's funny. Typically, what I'll say is like if someone's like, "Oh, is this a landscape or wildlife?" I'll say, "Well, it depends on the photographer who took it and what they
Yeah,
count it
that's
as."
a good point.
Right? Because I mean, you have landscape photographers who'll take really good shots with just wildlife in them, and then you'll have wildlife photographers who take really good shots of landscape with wildlife. I mean, if I'm looking at it more from an objective, quote unquote, standpoint, which is like, there's really no way to pin it down in an objective sense. But if I were to, I'd probably say I think compositionally is the compositional elements are pretty important. I think if it's the image is composed to cater to the wildlife primarily, I think that's more indicative of a quote unquote wildscape shot. What was it? Wildlife scape?
Mm.
Was that it?
Wildlife scape. Yeah.
Wildlife scape. Yep. So it's more that's more indicative of a wildlife scape shot if like the moose is following the rule of thirds and all of that. But I think if it's just kind of
Yeah.
wildlife and the animal's just kind of in there, but the composition of the image isn't really made to suit the animal's position in the environment. It's more just composed as a landscape with like a moose in the right hand corner somewhere or something. I think that would be more indicative of, say, like a landscape shot. But once again, it is really kind of dependent on who's the photographer taking it, right? And what they're saying and what they're actually prioritizing in the scene. And speaking of which, when you're actually going out and you're taking an environmental portrait, what are you composing? Like, how are you composing these images? What are you looking for? Are you looking for like, you said primarily trees and mountains. How much landscape are you looking to include in different circumstances? Things of this nature.
Yeah. Well, I think it all depends on where I find something, I was just thinking about one photo that I took. I think it was the winter before last, and it was a pair of Dall sheep, and they were up on this cliffside, which was like pretty much like a vertical drop. Like they're crazy, amazing animals, for one thing, that they
Yeah.
can like navigate these sheer cliffs, and just like find their way up the sides of these mountains. And yeah, so I've got this ram and this ewe on the side of this mountain, and they're small in frame, and so I flipped my camera vertical to get more of that cliff face.
Mhm.
And so it qualifies as a small in frame because the animals are small in frame, but I also like really wanted to illustrate and bring out the fact that like this was a really big cliff face, so small in frame lent itself well in that case to kind of give a sense of scale to the image, or to
Yeah.
the environment and to the scene overall. um, so it kind of depends on, I think, where you are and what story you want to tell with it.
Mhm.
For me, it's kind of just taking a look. I think like you have to pause and take a look around you. I think sometimes if you have the option, right? Like if the animal's not like running through the woods and like you get that split second and then it's done.
Yeah.
But if you have a minute and you can take a breath and you can look around and think, all right, what do I want to make with this? Um, what story do I want to tell? And I think that is those moments where you can kind of think it through a little bit better and really focus on what is this going to be? What do I want to make here? So yeah, it really depends on some of those key points being there, like the animal is cooperating and hanging out, and you have a minute to look around and you see the story you want to tell, and you can kind of position yourself or like, hey, I need to go down this slope, 10 steps or 10 feet or something, to kind of get in position to get that other mountain back there to line up in this way or something like that.
Mhm.
So it takes thought and it takes intentionality to make those kinds of things and kind of determine again and what you want to say with the whole image.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really think that is so important, especially with people so laser focused in on portraits. You know what I'm saying? I find myself doing it too.
Yeah.
Like if I get a bird that's sitting there, my brain's just like, get closer, smoother background. Like, it's like it's so
Yeah, yeah,
entrenched
yeah.
in that. And it's like it's important to just kind of like back up and be like, hey, the moon is behind it. Maybe we should include that. Obviously, that's an extreme example, right? If you actually fumble that, like
Yep.
that's like a whole different level. But paying attention to like the mountains and the trees and like you said what kind of story you want to tell with it. And I think that might make a lot of people's photography a lot more fulfilling because they get to a point where they're getting portraits consistently and they're like, wow, I just don't have the same enjoyment out of this anymore. I don't know what the deal is. And I'm like, yeah, because you're not challenging
Yeah.
yourself and you're not trying to tell a story with your photography. And I'm not one of those people that says like every image has to tell a story. Like I think sometimes just a clean portrait is cool, right? But if
Yep.
you have a cool landscape, right? Or if you have, especially if you have an instance where like the environment show can actually showcase a conservational story, right? Maybe you can show habitat that was destroyed in like a building an apartment complex or
Mm.
during the construction of a building or a road or something like that and being able to show that instead of just going in for that portrait again and again and again. Have you used your work for any conservational stuff in the past yet or no?
Um, Not yet. I haven't done a ton of self-promoting.
Mhm.
Things that I have gotten have kind of been uh happy accidents or like people coming to me to
Mhm.
use them.
Yeah.
So that's been kind of nice, but I haven't really done a ton of self-promotion. I got into it for the art of it, and I love the aspect of conservation, but I don't know if I've found the thing that I'm like uh hardcore, like this is my mission, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I
I
got you.
definitely want to I definitely want to be aware, and I think part of photography in general, it's kind of almost a double-edged sword. And what I mean by that is that like although I'm bringing beauty and awareness of the created world to people that might not go out and enjoy it as much, and maybe they're like, oh man, I should go for a walk in the woods today. Well, yeah, you should. But at
Yeah.
the same time, it's that we're seeing more and more people get into photography, which puts more and more pressure on wildlife. So it's like it's tough, because I mean you want to see that, but at the same time, I mean what you want to see is people enjoying, you know, wildlife and all that kind of stuff. And that's a good thing. But when I don't know, when you get too many people that are not caring about it, and are just interested in like getting that close up portrait,
Yeah.
it can, you know what I mean? Like it's like I said, it's a double edged sword. So how do you navigate that kind of stuff? And yeah, it's tough. But I know there are various conservation efforts um, here in Alaska, there's one that's they're threatening to put in a road, a mining road in where the bears
Oh, I heard about
like
that.
it'll affect, yeah, it'll affect tons of bears. So a lot of people are speaking out about that. Um, and I think that's a worthy cause because I would hate to see a road go in and ruin that environment
It's Lake
and
Clark, right?
yeah, it's Lake Clark. Yeah,
Mm.
potentially devastating a beautiful, serene area that the bears use and have used for, thousands of years.
Yeah,
And to put in a road for convenience or whatever it is, just for, whatever. But I would hate to see that. I hope it doesn't go through. But when these certain issues do come up, I definitely want to like call them out, or you know what I mean, like let people be aware of them.
mhm.
But I haven't found the one thing necessarily that I'm like laser focused in on,
Yeah,
in terms of like I'm going after this and this is what I, all the time. So um, I just really I think conservation in general and just taking care of what we have is important. And I try to communicate that as often as I can of taking care of things. And that means like picking up your trash and leaving a small footprint where you go.
mhm,
I think that's things that, you and I can do and promote just within our circles is, it's as simple as that. Just try not to disturb things too much
mhm.
and as little as possible. And, make as little impact as you can for the wildlife and still be able to enjoy yourself and come away with images that you're proud of.
For sure. Yeah, one thing you mentioned too that I thought was interesting. This is a point I used to talk about a lot, but I actually haven't mentioned it recently. Is that I think the advent of environmental portraits and small in frames and those being promoted by larger photographers on platforms and more respected photographers can actually help relieve some of the pressure that we see being put on wildlife because everyone wants that portrait. It's all these new people getting into it.
Yep.
They don't understand animal behavior. They don't really, they're not knowledgeable about ethics. They're not out here like, man, I can't wait to go out and cause an owl tons of stress today. This is my favorite part of the day. They're just like, I want to go see this cool bird. And they don't really know the etiquette around that. And I think being like, hey, you actually don't need the eye to fill up the entirety of the frame for it to be a good image. You can like back up sometimes and get some trees and get
Yeah.
some mountains. I think that becoming more of a standard practice is going to relieve some pressure. Because, like you said, it's a double edged sword. More people are interested in it. There's more work being put out into the world that's going to make non photographers and non wildlife enthusiasts appreciate it more, but now there's a bunch of pressure being put on very specific ecological areas, and there's not a lot of benefit coming back into that. Like the more fishermen you have, the more fishing licenses that are sold, and there's more, so that's more money towards conservation, and then same with hunting licenses and things like that. But we don't really have a non-consumptive use tax on wildlife photography. It'd be really
Yep.
difficult to do. It would, if we could figure that out, it would be extremely useful for conservation, but there would need to be like tax on gear for wildlife photography, but then sports photographers would be like, hey, we use the same stuff, like what's going on? And then you'd have to try and get
Yeah.
that passed. Like that'd all be very difficult, but it is a double-edged sword. And here it's ridiculous. Like after COVID, especially, it blew up. I've been shooting for 10 years. Some of
Yep.
my old spots when I would go to when I was like 4 feet tall, like they used to have like 20 photographers there. Now there'll be for shorted owls, there'll be 200 cars lined up on the road trying to photograph a shorted owl. Like
It's
one,
insane.
it was,
Yeah.
yeah, 2 winters ago there was a barn owl here, and the barn owl actually genuinely didn't care. Like I watched it, it wasn't being baited, but I watched it fly right next to people's tripods and grab a mouse off the ground and eat it in front of everybody, and then go grab another one. Like it was hunting successfully, all that stuff. Like the bird itself was fine, but there was literally like 100 cars lined up wherever the bird is and hundreds of
Wow.
people, and you couldn't drive through it. I didn't even photograph it because it wasn't even necessarily like the owls being harassed because the owl was chilling out. It was like, I don't want to be a part of this mob. Like there was people, like you try to
Yeah.
drive by and there's some dude with his tripod in the lane and he would just stare at you for like 5 seconds like this and then finally move, and it's like, this is a disaster, right? So
Yeah.
I yeah, I think that's definitely an important element of it. I don't know if your places out there have blown up or not, but ours here have, like, bad.
Yeah. We still get, we don't have it quite that bad,
Mhm.
but there are definitely places that get mobbed pretty heavily. If we get like a great gray owl around the area and people start finding out about it, we'll get a lot of people, and by a lot of people I mean like 30 or 40. Uh,
Yeah.
it's not as big. There's just not as many people here, although it is increasing. And you'll get people that'll go back there every day for hours and hours and hours, and it's like I watch these I watch these like three or four people. They're clustered. We were shooting a great gray owl a couple years ago, and it was winter time, and they're all clustered in like this one little spot over like 20 feet away from me.
Yeah.
And every time the owl's head would turn, click, click, everybody would fire out, click, 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 and then the owl would look away, and then everything, and then it would look back again, click, 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 and I was like,
All the same image.
get up and move. Like
Yeah.
they're all getting the same photo, and it's
Hmm.
like get up and move and do something. Like you got that shot, good for you. Now like get up and move and see what else you can make with that if you're gonna
Hmm.
be here. Like let's not like all get close to the owl, but like if you need to circle around or something like that, just like move around. um and then there's other times, so there's when something like that, an owl or something else shows up, usually like there'll be a good number of the local photographers who show up and kind of line up or whatever, or get in their little bunches. um but Denali National Park during the moose rut is an absolute zoo,
Yeah, I
and
can
you'll get
imagine.
just like this little park road that just clogs up, and you got buses trying to get through. You've got photographers on the side of the road with their trucks and cars, lining the roads, and it just like it's crazy out there. So that's probably the worst thing we get is there in Denali Park. Because everything else, like going out to shoot bears or everything else costs a lot more money. You've got to
Mhm.
hire a pilot and you hop on a plane and get over to Lake Clark or Brooks Falls or something like that. So
Yeah.
typically those are a little bit more, they can control those areas and the flow of people to those areas a lot more, where the
Mhm.
park is just nuts because there's no filter for that really. It's like it's open for the first 14 miles of the park road, and you can't go past that without like riding the bus or having a special permit. But like that first 14 miles, that's where the moose rut is.
Yeah.
And so like it gets crazy there in the fall. Like September is just nuts with people. And so I would say like that's our biggest one is there. But otherwise, like I can go somewhere and literally like have the place all to myself in so many places. I've got a lot of places like that in Eagle River where like I don't have to share it with anybody.
Mhm.
I can just like enjoy this all by myself, and that's the best.
Dude, I'm so jealous. It's really bad around large population centers. So I'm pretty close to Boston. It's like 40 minutes south of me, and tons of people. And wherever you have a lot of people, you just have a bunch of wildlife enthusiasts. And then like like you were saying with the great gray owls, but here it's snowy owls. And sometimes
Oh
I've
yeah.
almost stopped shooting snowy owls in their entirety, because there'll be a snowy owl on the beach, and there'll be a half circle of like 150 people photographing it, and they'll all be a respectful distance away, and they'll all be like, "Oh, we're being quiet, we're being ethical." But I'm like, dude, if you look at the owl, it's not sleeping. Like its eyes are like slightly open, just watching this whole mob of people everywhere
Yeah,
around it.
sure. Hmm.
And it's tough if you're near New York City, if you're near Boston, if you're near Portland, Oregon, things like that, to have places to yourself. I do have mountains like an hour and a half north of me. They don't have like grizzly bears and crazy stuff, but we got moose, we got black bears, stuff like that. So I just got a new
Nice.
truck. I'm getting a rack for my kayak, and then the instant that comes in, I'm gonna be just going up and kayaking for moose and loons up there, because I'm tired of
Nice.
all the crowds and all the
Yes.
people and stuff like that. But yeah. It
Man,
is start.
speaking of kayak, I
Yeah.
went out. I bought a new kayak this year, and say I got up Sunday morning and I dropped my kayak in a local lake, and there's a loon pair that has a chick that's freshly hatched.
Mhm.
So I dropped my kayak in this lake, and I had it all to myself. It was a quiet lake. The water was like dead calm with a little bit of a mist coming off, and and it was just so nice, you know. I found a colony of Bonaparte skulls, which are really pretty, you know, they're a
Mhm.
really cool gull. And so I got some cool photos of them, but just hanging out with these loons and just on this lake that like one guy showed up with his dog at the put in for the kayaks, and like he
Yeah.
stayed for like 10 minutes and then he left. So it was like just perfectly quiet. Uh just an amazing time. It was so pretty and peaceful. It's like, man, I'm gonna do this more often for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that when I get the chance. Well, it is starting to get a little late. As you can see, it's dark here. People can't see this who are listening, but I've got my phone illuminating my face. It looks like I'm telling like a spooky campfire story or something. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
so
it'll be light here pretty much all night. So it won't get actually dark
wow, that's crazy. Yeah.
until like another couple months. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty wild.
I've been once in mid-July, and then I think I was there last year in June. No, no, 2 years ago in early June, around there. And I just
Okay.
remember
Yeah,
it
yeah.
it just never got dark. It's crazy, you
Yep.
know. Very jealous of that as well. I
Well, I think
might just
that's
have
the
to. What's up?
yeah. I was thinking that was the first time we met
Mhm.
um at that pizza place, Moose's Tooth Pizza.
Yeah. No, so
Did you
I
guys
met you and Ray at the grouse place, but I had to bounce before I got to the pizza place. And I'm sad about that
Oh,
because
yeah, that's right.
I
Yes,
was
yes, yes.
I was sad about that because dude, I always leave early for airports. It's kind of a side thing. It's like my dad drilled it into my head. So I left like 2 or 3 hours early to go to the airport because I'm like, I don't want to miss my flight. But I missed the pizza thing, and then also some of my other friends got great shots of Vlad, Vlad the
Oh,
red
yeah.
throated,
Yep.
and they got
Yep.
great shots of him. I got skunked on him the day before. He was there, but the light was
Oh,
garbage.
man.
And then I
Man.
went there later for sunset, and he was like, I watched him get dive bombed by an eagle, which was really scary. Like an eagle came
Oh, wow.
over, hovered right over him, and he dove into the water, and then it flew off, and then it disappeared, and it was like, it was this. So I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
try and get him again at some point. But yeah, it's almost 9 here. It's getting darker. Before we wrap this up, where can people find you online? You have your Instagram. Do you have anywhere else you want to send people to?
Yeah. First, one quick thing about Vlad.
Yeah.
Since you brought him up, like I was telling a buddy of mine, I was like, man, I don't think I'm gonna shoot Vlad this year. Like, I don't know what else I can get of him. You know, like it's just like he's so accommodating when you find him that it's
Yeah.
just like, what else could I do? And then like this year, um, I just thought of a different idea, and he was coming up right close, and so like I got this shot that I was really happy with.
Mhm.
And I was like, man, I need to just stop saying that I'm not going to shoot him, because there's always going to be something where I'm like, oh, I've got this idea I want to try, you know, because
Yeah.
like it's a cool bird and he's right there, you know, and so it's like, why wouldn't I try to like push myself and try to get creative and you know try to do something different than what I've gotten before. Like I think that's a challenge that I certainly shouldn't shrink around or away from, just
Mhm.
because like this bird's hanging out. Like there's gonna be a time when he's not coming back anymore. So
I
like get
know.
what you can while it's good. So
Dude, Vlad is a
but yeah,
celebrity,
I
by the way. Before
yeah,
you, yeah, in
he's
all the group
totally a
chats I'm in
celebrity.
with young photographers, like all around the world, like Vlad is the man. Everyone loves Vlad.
And you know what's funny is that the all the locals started calling him Romeo. Like
Oh,
that was his
really?
name by the locals for a
Hmm.
long time, and then I think it was Ray like renamed him Vlad just because like he poked somebody's finger, like he impaled somebody, and
Oh,
so
no.
he took on that name. Yeah, he got somebody's finger pretty good. He actually got my finger this year, but he didn't draw blood. But that other time he actually drew blood, so that was pretty funny.
That's crazy.
Um,
That's insane.
yeah, but so social media, I mean, you know, I post on Instagram and Facebook. I think Instagram probably mostly. I'm also on like Flickr. Flickr is kind of weird because it's like when I do all my edits, I just dump them to Flickr
Mm.
because I can then download them from Flickr and like and then I can do like, you know, post them to Instagram or something. But I dump everything that I'm editing like for the day. I just upload it all to Flickr and then I can use it for, you know, whatever, because I don't do that. You know, you don't post everything you're editing for one day on Instagram or something.
That would be absurd.
That's
Yeah, that'd
crazy.
be crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. And so I do like usually post like once or twice a day, usually once a day for sure, but yeah, I'd say Instagram I'm pretty consistent on, and then Threads is kind of the same. I think it's just kind of is the same type of thing where
Mm.
I think that double posts from there, and Facebook I think double posts as well. But sometimes I'll tell a story a little bit more with my images, like talk about the scenario or that, what happened, or getting the shot or different things, and I'll write a little bit more about it on Facebook when I post from my photography page. So yeah, that I like to do that and share that story. But otherwise, like my website and everything like that, got a lot more stuff on there. So,
Sweet,
and I'm
awesome.
trying to do a blog. I'm trying to keep up with a blog, but and in fact, like we were talking about the 180 to 600, and I've been wanting to put together an actual review of that lens and talk about
Yeah.
some of the things we talked about here. So I'll do that eventually before it's old news.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, man, I want to thank you for coming on. This was a blast. Are you gonna go out shooting later today?
Maybe. I don't know. It's still pretty bright. I've been thinking about maybe going for a sunset osprey one of
Mhm.
these days. So we'll see.
You have
There's
osprey
also
up
a great
there?
horned owl around that I
Really?
want to find. Yeah, we have osprey.
No kidding, dude. They're everywhere, man. I didn't think they'd
They're
be all the way
everywhere.
up
Yeah.
there. Jeez, dude.
Yep. They migrate up.
Mhm,
Like April, I think, is when they migrate up, and I'm not sure when they leave. Probably by September.
mhm. Sweet, man. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, once again, I want to thank you. This was a blast. It was a lot of fun. And also, you might have convinced me on that 180 to 600. Maybe you might have. Like, I might have to go.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about it more. Like, you'll let me know your thoughts on it. But yeah, I really appreciate the invitation to come on and talk, and it's been a lot.
Yeah, no problem, man. And I
So
also want to
thank you.
thank everybody for getting through this episode. I know a lot of my episodes could be long, but they're a lot of fun to record, and I hope they're fun to listen to. But yeah, I want to thank you guys, and I'll see you on
Yeah,
the
for
next
sure.
one.